Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's discussion is going to focus on the role of NGOs and CSOs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Previously on The Square, we've had discussions looking at the efforts made by corporates, looking at the efforts made by government. But tonight we have with us people who represent the civil society organization as well as NGOs in Rwanda who are with us and are going to give us an overview of what has been done so far in Rwanda regarding how they are fighting this pandemic. Joining us, we have our first guest with us, who is called Papa Diouf. Papa Diouf is the chair of the Network for International Organizations in Rwanda, known as NGO. He's also the country director of VSO Rwanda. Mr. Diouf, great to have you on The Square.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you. We're also joined on The Square by John Bosco Nyemazi, who is the Executive Secretary of the Rwanda Civil Society Platform. Mr. John Bosco, great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Great. My name is Diana Mpisi, host of The Square. I'm joined by my resident panelists. Always happy to have them here with us. Charles Haba, great to have you on The Square.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
Good.
Good.
And Bernard Namata, great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Dan.
Before we kick off, as we always do, any midweek highlights the resident panelists would like to share? Charles, I'll start with you, briefly.
Made in Rwanda politics hit my eye. My friend Jean-Marie Vianney Gatabazi bounced back in the same position as governor of the Northern Province. I wish him the best of luck. I've not yet wished him the best of luck. I think the best way to do that is by going to visit him in one of my Temberu Rwanda campaigns, as I promised to Belize the other day.
Yes.
But I think it's unique to Rwanda, and I think he's the best after Ambassador Joe Habineza. You go away and then you bounce back. I think it's unique to Rwanda. We have our own way of doing our things, and we need to clap for ourselves for being unique in our own way. Yes.
True. Brenna, any midweek highlights that you'd like to share with us?
I'm not sure I agree with him that that's made in Rwanda or unique either. I don't think so. I think it's the nature of politics. In politics, there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies. It is interests. But the highlight for me this week is the big announcement around opening up the airport, commercial flights. I think it will be a big deal, and I expect that it will complement tourism, but it would be good to get the protocols out. Because so far we know you have to present your COVID certificate, the results, but we need more than that, because clearly I think accessing the airport will change. There will be more detail, yeah, so it will be good if the Ministry of Infrastructure or Airports Authority sends out communication on the new guidelines, ahead of 1st August.
1st August,
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for your highlights. And we are here, like I said earlier on, to talk about non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations and what they've been doing to fight the pandemic in Rwanda. And I'd like to thank our guests once again for being with us. Mr. Diouf and Mr. Bosco, I hope you can hear us clearly.
Yes, we can.
You can hear us clearly. Great. Okay, so the first question is to do with the funds that have been raised under this network of international non-governmental organizations in Rwanda. And we know that a fund, a sum of $9.2 million has been raised so far during this pandemic. And the first question, and this is to you, Mr. Diouf, if you could just tell us this $9.2 million that was raised so far under the organizations, under the framework of NGO. If you could just tell us how these funds were raised and a bit more as well of this network of international non-governmental organizations.
Thank you very much. But thank you very much again for having us tonight to talk about our network, and good evening again to my brother Bosco. The network of NGOs was formed in 2005 with a twofold objective. One objective, the first one was to be an exchange platform for the members But the second objective was really to speak with one voice so that we can make a greater impact. At the moment, we have 84 members within the network, members who are international non-governmental organizations that have been registered with the Rwandan Governance Board. So this is a big move. From 2005 to now, we've grew by almost 300%. But these 84 members represent about 50% of the organization registered in Rwanda. So we work in every single district, every single sector, and we operate also in every single intervention area in the country. If you look at the national strategy for transformation, we also contribute to every single pillar. So the economic pillar, the transformation, the social pillar, and the transformational governance pillar as well. It's quite important to say that the network works very closely with the Rwandan civil society platform, but as well as the government of Rwanda and the development partners as well. So we have three main pillars, and those three pillars help us to really leverage the collective strength of our members to be able to maximize our impact in Rwanda. So one of them is about networking, and what we're trying to do here is to try to create a stronger and well-functioning network. And the way we do it is by bringing the members together through general assemblies, through a certain number of activities that really help them to bond and to be able to collaborate more effectively. The second pillar is around advocacy. And advocacy really is looking at common issues that we can take a position on and try to influence policies and practices. And again, building on the credible body of evidence that we are generating within the network. And the third one, which is quite exciting to me, is the participation to decision-making processes. And the way we do it, we've put together some thematic working groups whereby organizations that work in a specific intervention area come together, cross-fertilize, collaborate, and come up with positions that we can really use to intervene or to contribute more effectively to the government sector working groups. And that's quite important. So those three pillars really are the backbone of the network. So you might want to ask me, before I answer to your question about COVID, about our contribution to Rwanda. Just before COVID-19, we undertook a survey where we looked at 4 sectors. So we looked at health, agriculture, water, sanitation, and hygiene, as well as education, if I've not mentioned that already. So what we've realized is that if you take only 63 organizations out of 84 who responded to the survey, our contribution to the budget was $134 million, only for these 4 sectors, which is quite significant. And we're talking about 37% contribution to education and health, 18% to agriculture, and about 8% to WASH. And that's really illustrate the need and the critical importance of the NGOs and the civil society organization, obviously, to the transformation of the country. But most importantly, out of the 134 million, 34% was leveraged. They were leveraged out of Rwanda. So these are money funds that were not earmarked to Rwanda, which we have been able to leverage and bring it to the country, again, to contribute to the budget of the country, which is quite important. In relation to COVID, as you know, COVID has caught all of us by surprise. We were not ready for that. But what has been very clear is that we had to adapt our programming very quickly. So what we've done is we've discussed with the donors that we have. We've negotiated with some of them. Many of them have allowed us to reallocate or repurpose the funding that we had at the moment to be able to rapidly respond to COVID-19 and the impact of it. Other funding was additional funding that we've been able to raise from call for proposal from other donors. But most importantly, a little part of that pot of money, which is not negligible, has been raised by staff. So staff within our organization have decided to put money together to support their brothers and sisters, which was quite important. So we've been able to raise between March and May about $9 million, which is the equivalent of roughly about 8 billion Rwandan franc. And that fund that those funds that we managed to raise went mainly to health, and for obvious reason, and to agriculture, or let's call it food security and livelihood. So for health, we've supported the Ministry of Health with about 2 million direct support, and that support went to, providing personal protective equipment, went to test kits, went to support the contact tracing. For example, we had about 20 cars at the command center to be able to do this aggressive contact tracing in Rwanda, which was quite significant. But it has also helped to support women group through cash transfer to be able to do face mask, and that's really important. And for food security and livelihoods, what we've been able to do is provide cash transfers to urban wage workers who during the lockdown couldn't work and couldn't generate income. But we've been also able to support people with disabilities. We've been able to support genocide survivors. We've been able to support in some of the districts, Ubudehe 1 and 2 communities or households. And that's significant, because when we did our assessment, we realized that one of the biggest impact of COVID was health related, but the socio-economic impact was greater than the health impact. And lastly, we supported as well through food supply about 20 districts in the country, working very closely with the Joint Action Development Forum as well as the districts. So that's quite important. So I think 9 million, yes, I mean, in terms of figure, it's a great figure, but I think what is most important is what we've been able to do by supporting the most vulnerable, those who were the mostly affected by COVID-19.
Thank you, Mr. Diouf. Yes, indeed, 9.2 million, in the short space of time since the pandemic started is it's pretty a significant number. And, before we look at the Rwanda Civil Society platform, because I think the mobilization of funds, that's really to do with NGO, but when it comes to the implementation and the disbursement of funds and so forth and so on, working with local organizations, we'd love to hear from Mr. John Bosco regarding how the Rwanda Civil Society platform works. But just very quickly, if there's anything Bernard or Charles would like to say with regards to what Mr. Diouf said. So, Mr. John Bosco, if you could take us through, already Mr. Diouf spoke about priority areas of the sectors that these funds went to, from health to agriculture, as well as some socioeconomic activities. How does it work when it comes to the implementation and making sure these funds go to the communities that need it most, in terms of working with with organizations under the Rwanda Civil Society platform?
Thank you, Diana. Before I answer that question, I wish to reiterate that COVID-19 pandemic, was a force majeure. None of us was anticipating it, and when it hit, and even that's why the strategies we had to to make sure that we try to respond according to the situation. But like my colleague, I think briefly it's how the civil society platform is formed up. We have 9 umbrella organizations, and those 9 umbrella organizations have their subsidiary members close to 1,400 plus. One of our roles, I think we have coordination and representation of those members. but also capacity building of those members, and facilitate joint advocacy initiatives. So recently, maybe before I talk about how we implement that, recently the network of African network of NGOs carried out a study across 44 countries in Africa, and I just want to mention two indicators. One was on the loss of funding. 55% across those 44 countries, 55% immediately lost funding, and 66% were expecting to lose that funding in the next 3 to 6 months. You understand how challenging it is in terms of implementing our interventions. 2 was on sustainability of civil society work, whereby around 77 believed that the future of civil society is going to be jeopardized. The future of civil society work is uncertain. However, as you asked, in our Rwandan resilient spirit, our intervention did not stop. Instead, we tried to respond to the situation, whereby, civil society organizations helped local government authorities to acquire and install hygiene and sanitation facilities at busy traffic places, but as well as mobilizing the community in terms of measures to prevent and combat COVID-19. So, for instance, if I highlight a few examples from our members, let's take an example of the NUDOL, the Union of People Living with Disabilities. They have, helped, their close to 2,000 beneficiaries by providing emergency relief food and non-food items, but also advocacy on inclusive approach to make sure that even those people with disabilities are part of the whole process. For instance, the network for people living with HIV, they have, tried to advocate for them on how to access their medical treatment, even in this period that have been in the lockdown, how they can access that, but also engaging with the Ministry of Health for redirection or reallocation of their budgets for previously planned activities on how they can respond to the needs of people living with HIV. But also, for instance, Profami Twese Hamwe, that works on women promotion and on women empowerment and gender promotion, have been supporting their members because the cases of GBV increased during the pandemic. So they have, together with Transparency International Rwanda, in collaboration, in partnership with GMO, they installed toll-free number to ensure that they try to monitor what is happening, how they can address those cases. Last but not the least, because there are very many, I can't exhaust all of them, but at least for Ibuka, the umbrella of civil society organizations that work on the interests of people who survived genocide against the Tutsi, in a campaign that they called Survivors in Solidarity, they have been able, together with the entire members of the civil society, to collect around close to 100 million that actually served close to 7,000 families, to ensure that, looking at the most hit survivors, but also increased counseling on a situation like this. There are mental health issues, to ensure that at least they can manage that situation. So in terms of how this funding can be used, I think Papa Diouf has highlighted the means of implementation, but for us, we partner because we understand the local context. International NGOs, they mobilize funding, but we also work together in terms of implementation because we understand the local context, ensuring that the population, the community, the household people receive, this support. So I think the critical sectors that we believe that need this support, the education sector, especially when you look at this pandemic, exposed some weaknesses in how, for instance, you see the country has invested a lot in ICT, but for instance, to be waiting to open schools in September, there have been processes engaging into learning approaches. So there is need to invest more in the use of ICT to ensure that even in the future, when we are hit by this pandemic like this, we are able to address those challenges.
Absolutely. We'll definitely get into the rest later on. But thank you very much, John Bosco. It really shows us the significant work I think the civil society is doing, NGOs, civil society organizations, even faith-based organizations, in addressing some of the hard-hit communities during this COVID-19 pandemic. The next part I want us to go to is, it's a key word that's being used a lot during the coronavirus when we're talking about particular words, pivoting, looking at how next NGO is going to work in the future. There's a heavy reliance on, physically engaging with beneficiaries, whether it's town hall meetings, whether it's, training workshops and so forth and so on. But before I get to that, I'd like to just hear from the resident panelists on the very informative points that you've shared with us and our viewers tonight. Perna, is there anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think it's commendable what the NGO world has been doing, especially raising awareness around the need to support vulnerable groups, marginalized groups, because most of them were already doing this work even before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. But we know, like they pointed out, the shocks that have come as a result of the pandemic have made it worse, and we have more vulnerable people, more marginalized people that will need help for a very long time. But we saw a bit of activity, which I think, like the campaign on gender-based violence, I think that was well done. There was a lot of work. But I wanted to hear more in terms of accountability and transparency around this funding, because we know, for instance, from government, every time they borrow, we see we have borrowed 100 million or so from the IMF. We've gotten this money from. On the side of NGOs, this amount of money that they are talking about, and you kind of asked earlier about it, where the fundraising is coming from. Can we understand, one, that how this envelope works? Before I came to the show, I tried to check on the websites of some of the local NGOs to find out if there are any financial reports that have been done so far in terms of the activities. And unfortunately, I couldn't find any reports on progress so far. I think only Never Again has a financial report, the few that I checked, which also is as of December 2019. Mm-hmm. And there's no comparison for 2018. So in terms of accountability
and transparency
around, you get this money and it actually and people need to know that it is actually ending up in the right hands. How is this being done to ensure that there are no leakages?
Thank you very much, Brenna. So, Mr. Diouf or John Bosco, Mr. Nyamanzi, the biggest question that we're asking right now from Brenna is, accountability and transparency. The $9.2 million. How do we ensure it goes to the right people, the communities who need it the most? How is it monitored?
Yeah, no. Thank you very much, Brenna, for this very important question. I think accountability and transparency is our motto in a sense. When you look at accountability, you're looking at different things. I think and I'm sure Bosco will agree with me that the first accountability we have is to the people, right? Is to the people. So we are doing this because we are serving the people, right? So that's our first accountability. Because I think what you're looking at here, what you were mentioning is a vertical accountability or a bottom-up accountability. So, but what we're looking at here first is a top-down accountability. So we're doing it because we want to transform the life of the most vulnerable groups. So I think that's one point that is quite important to mention. The second aspect to your question is once again this funding is a combination of funding streams, right? So some organizations have already received funding from development partners to do a specific piece of work, right? For example, we were supposed to work with the schools, right? But the schools are closed now. What do? Do we stop and wait until September, or do we find innovative way to be able to make sure that there is home learning? So we discuss with the donor, we agree, and in line with the government as well, in line with the government priorities, and we decide, well, instead of doing this, we're going to repurpose that funding. So we're going to reallocate it so that we can do an alternative program that will still help to improve the learning outcomes, right? So there is a proposal that is submitted, there's a proposal that is approved, and this is done in conjunction with the government. So that accountability is there, right? Is there. So there are reports that we're submitting, for that, etc. So we are held to account on that. So that's one funding stream. The second funding stream was, as I mentioned earlier, were additional funding that organization applied for. Right? So this is a new call for proposal. We apply for it in line with the government priorities and plans. So that funding was awarded to an organization with a clear roadmap, and reports are being submitted as well. And this is done again in collaboration with the government, with the JAF, with RGB, etc. So, and the third funding stream, as I mentioned earlier, was the staff contributing their own money to support the communities, right? And that's, of course, the only accountability you have here is the staff association, the staff representation within the organization. But what we're trying to do, I think that what we tried to do here was to make sure that all this information is available to the public. I think when we did that, we made it available to the public. We put it on social media. We shared it with the Rwanda Governance Board, just to make sure that it is clear. But at the end of the day, what we really want is really to support those most vulnerable communities who are on the ground. So once again, this is a separate process because we have a clear process that we follow for normal. For a normal program where we develop plans that are approved by the district, that are approved by RGB. We report every 6 months. We report to the donors as well. All of that is available for all organizations that you would want. So that accountability is de facto there. But I think that for COVID-19, we had to fast track. We had to fast track because the virus wasn't waiting for us. We had to fast track, but that accountability is still there. And I think we're trying as much as possible to be transparent. And I think you having us here on the, on on your show is show really that we really want to be transparent with the money that was awarded to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Diouf. Charles, you've been awfully quiet. Is there something you'd like to share?
Yeah. Obviously, it's usually very good to listen to people in the NGO world because I think part of what they do is to make people listen. Advocacy, and they will hit you with a lot of these amazing terminologies to give you the impression that they are extremely busy. and I will give an example of what Papa Diouf was just saying, and he's given 3 responses to of which I picked out 2 to Bana's question on accountability, and he says. Gave an example of cars that they gave, and to show that they supported and staff who contributed towards people's livelihoods, and that's amazing, and that will probably appear in a very beautiful report with amazing pictures on social media and what have you. And I sometimes I am conflicted. Is that how they work? And therefore that's how they operate.
I think,
but that's not the point I wanted to raise.
No,
really.
but I like that point because I wanted to follow up and say I hope you're going to ask a hard-hitting question.
No, I do actually do not have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, that is my observation. Carrying on with observations and probably linked to what I would like to see. As something more tangible in terms of the space in which they play, and I'll take it from Bosco's earlier point around education. So, for people who are not privileged enough to afford internet and for their kids to do e-learning, for the very vulnerable communities, how are these students able to be kept in school and studying? And take a practical example of one Papa Diouf just said that a lot of the monies they have raised, a lot of the funding that they have raised is mainly for health and education. And one thing that specific groups that come into my mind, and if it could be very tangible stuff that we talk about, how are these kids kept informed? You have health, people living with different sorts of conditions, HIV, AIDS, they because of lockdown and curfews, they're not able to access some of the health centers. You have commercial sex workers, these very, very special groups. And if it's health and education, I would imagine these are some of the areas that since the international staff, the experts, are not able to drive around their jeeps and go to Pilipili every day, a little bit of that money can go into teaching people in the villages on radio, for example. So I have a worry that some of the monies should be spent more tangibly than giving us very sweet buzzwords.
So you're concerned,
yes.
and of course this is a loaded statement, and
yes.
Papa Diouf and John Bosco from Charles is basically, and Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, you're not really convinced. You have a concern that
yes.
this amazing amount of money, how surely it's going to the most needy,
yes.
the tangible, most practical people who need it most, who have been really most hard hit by this pandemic. Yes. This is what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely.
In very colorful words.
Politely.
Yes. John Bosco, would you like to respond to that?
Yes. Before to Charles's question, just small thing to highlight on Bana's question on accountability. I think one of our core values is accountability and transparency. And I think, Papa put it well, that we have to be accountable to the citizens. But on top of that, there are different compliance standard operating procedures that guide our operations. Now, I just want to inform you about the recent development, whereby now, since last year, NGOs, civil society, have been reporting their financial statements with Rwanda Revenue Authority. And this is a very good practice to ensure that at least we are accountable in our operation, because we can't be agents of accountability and transparency. Then we are not accountable to ourselves. So that would be a problem. But coming back to Charles's question on these other groups, for instance, you talk about sex workers, you talk about education. Among our members, we have Rwanda NGOs Forum that has close to 120 member organizations from civil society. Their interventions are around health sector, including, those sex workers among their beneficiaries. They have been carrying out, several interventions even during this pandemic. And actually today we have been in touch with them, showing us a 3 months project of how they can support those beneficiaries. But in tangible ways, I referred to the report that was released by African Network of NGOs. But we are also in the process now to document not only qualitatively, but to quantify what has been done by, our member organizations in terms of, responding to these challenges. But really what we can tell you, we are present in different districts of this country, and we've been trying to, to specify, because even our umbrella organizations are grouped based on the areas of intervention. So I think this platform is really, we cannot exhaust everything, but in terms of accountability, as you're talking about, we are free to share with you some of these reports, at least to get some of those details.
Thank you. If I may, yeah. So I think, Charles is putting, if I may call you Charles, obviously. Charles is putting some interesting, he's giving an interesting perspective, right? So I think that that the feedback that we are taking. But I think what is really important to know, Charles, is that we seem to be anecdotal, probably. But I think, you should go to the field, you should go to the ground and see what is really happening and the power of the NGOs in the field. So let me just give you the example of the organization I work for, VSO. So we work with the deaf community. We work with the Rwanda National Union of the Deaf. So as you know, gender-based violence, sexual reproductive health issues, teen pregnancies. I think it was the topic last week. It's a serious issue, right? It's a serious issue. But what we're doing is, there are many organizations focusing on that because we strongly believe that it's a critical issue, and the government also take it as a priority. But what we are doing specifically is we are focusing on the deaf community, because the deaf people are much more vulnerable than those who don't have the disability. And that's so impactful, because what we're doing here is not trying to have our banner up there. It's trying to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind, because that's what we sign up to. And I think that's quite important. And I think when you go to the field, when you discuss with those organizations representing the communities, you would see it will speak by itself. So I don't think that it's about the report that we're submitting. I don't think it's about what I'm telling you now. I would have loved to have I don't want to call it a beneficiary. I would have loved to have someone from the community blessing, living in Nyamasheke, who is blind and who has been affected by COVID and who has received a cash transfer to be able to get food or to be able to get fertilizers, etc., coming here and speaking to you. I think that will speak much better than me sitting here and talking to you. So I think it's not that nothing is being done. I think things are being done. We've created, we've supported micro businesses. We've supported the private sector as NGOs. We set up private sector as well. So I mean, there's a lot that is being done. I think thinking that we are not accountable, we are not transparent, I think it's not the right picture. And it would have been good to have someone from the Rwandan governance board here, from the government of Rwanda, to tell you how we are accountable from the top to the bottom, right? I think that's quite important.
Thank you very much, Papa Diouf. I think, Charles, I hope your question has been answered.
I was also hoping it would be answered. But you see, when you engage government officials and they tell you we have put in 20 billion francs into the economy and it has done this and we have allowed motors to work and the multiplier effect, you have figures that you can chew onto. When you talk to the corporates and they tell you we have distributed 2 million masks and Engine says they have given hundreds of liters, tens of thousands of liters to these motorbike guys. It's something that you can really quantify. Give Papa Diouf and Bosco another extra hour. They'll tell you about their planning a validation workshop to tell you how this. But I beg to differ. You see where Papa Diouf was coming from was actually a very, very interesting perspective to my ears, and when you started talking about the deaf in Nyamasheche and saying what they have done, we are working with the deaf in Nyamasheche, so I kept anticipating to say that this is actually how we are working with them. So maybe it is the training, maybe it is their choice of words that they are taught not to glorify their good jobs. No, but I stand wanting.
You stand wanting. No, yes. I'd like to differ. I think what guests have told us, I think it takes also us to go into the field to really see and understand, I think, the impact. And
I intended to say something else.
Cash injections and so forth and so on. So I think in the interest of the show and the timing, you can't give us these tangible things Charles wants to say.
I also wanted to say something extremely important, that I was coming from an ignorant perspective. Yes. So I am not aware of the details. Yeah. Yes, so I think a lot more needs to be done. Bana as well tried to search the internet for some of the reports. She hardly found any. So I think there is a lot that Bosco and Papa Diouf and your world you need to do. Yes.
We have about 2,000 civil society organizations. We have about 173 international organizations. And she went to see only 1 or 2 or 3. So that's one thing. But I want to say, I think if you ask a clear question, you get a clear answer, obviously. So if you want figures, we can give you figures. We can tell you that we receive 4 million and we supported 4 million students in the country. So that's why we can do it. Yeah, we can clearly do it. So I'm more than happy to see you after the show and give you all the figures, so that, because I think that you are, you are an influencer. So I think that if I manage to change the way you're looking at the civil society, you will help us probably to share the word. But after this show, I will definitely link up with you and give you more information.
Thank you very much, Diouf. Charles, we'll be waiting for you and Papa Diouf to have a serious conversation, and he informs you.
I have a few hectares of land that we can sell to the deaf.
Yeah, so just very quickly, I want us to go to a Twitter feed. We have a few minutes left, but before we go to a Twitter feed, if you can just tell us, Papa Diouf and John Bosco, this whole COVID-19 pandemic, has it changed the way you work as NGOs? Has it made you, because it has fast-tracked a lot of how companies work in terms of being more practical, in terms of getting results faster. This is some of the silver lining this pandemic has done. And we've had some of the discussions on the show. So how has it changed the way NGOs work? Is there less bureaucracy? Is there more quick results that we're seeing? Because it's a pandemic that requires a lot of quick and urgent work ethic. So can you just tell us, how has it affected you, just very briefly before we go to a Twitter feed? And do you think it's going to change the future of how the NGO, the civil society sector works in this country? John Bosco, I'll start with you, but very briefly, please.
Thank you so much, Diana. I think we have to look at this pandemic also to leave us with some lessons. One, someone told me that the pandemic was a necessary evil. So we had to learn new things, especially, to use virtual workspaces, for instance. And this is where we really need to invest more, to bring more productivity in our work. Two, we've got, the global funding landscape is on decline, including this pandemic. So we've got now to start thinking what we need to do, including can we work with private sector, partnership? What can we add? Can we add value to the private sector? But can private sector also, in their corporate social investment, also fund some interventions of the civil society to serve the community? That is something we see as an important thing. 3 is how can we partner with government? You know, when you look at policy and legal environment here in Rwanda, it provides, you know, for stakeholder engagement, including civil society. When you look at NGO law, both local and international NGOs. So we need to partner to co-create solutions that can address some of these challenges that have been posed by the pandemic, because we have seen, you know, becoming so important to invest in coalitioning, coming together. For instance, we've been thinking of how we can create an emergency fund for civil society that even the government, even the development partners, the NGOs can, you know, inject in some resources that could help us in future to address some of these shocks that are as a result of this pandemic. So we think a lot can be done, and we are still engaging with government. Of recent, we submitted a detailed paper whereby we've been suggesting the strength of civil society to government on some areas that we can contribute, but emphasizing on partnerships, so that because the government cannot deliver alone, it needs, you know, civil society, and that's why it is very painted and highlighted in National Strategy for Transformation when it comes to partnership.
Thank you very much, Mr. John Bosco. If you can just quickly go to a Twitter feed and just have a look at what people's views and comments and suggestions are regarding the role of NGOs during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the first tweet, if you can have it on our screens, is from someone called Jacent. And Jacent states that, he has a couple of tweets that I'll read out loud. Could please have it on our screens. He says that, hello, the NGOs and CSOs should consider the following: being prepared to minimize or manage the disruption and the financial implications of this time and the times to come, safeguarding the well-being of your staff and volunteers, the community, donors, and other stakeholders. His other tweet, he goes on to say that he also thinks that these organizations should be able to stay informed, search for funding opportunities, should as well prepare for financial implications, share their challenges, and seek help, and lastly, co-learn with peers globally. So these are some of the suggestions and ideas on this need to really pivot and look at how to engage in operations differently. We have a tweet from Laurent, and Laurent's tweet states that the work of NGOs and CSOs has never been easy. COVID-19 has added a new challenge, increasing restrictions on activities in all areas and a considerable reduction in the space for action. I would like to know what our panelists suggest to NGOs and CSOs to overcome this challenge. And we also have a tweet from Mr. Philbert. And Philbert says that NGOs should support and embrace the momentum of Rwanda to fight COVID-19. The support should both be technical and financial. They should arrange that COVID-19 is an issue integrated in their ongoing projects, but harmonized with government initiatives. And I think a lot of this speaks to what JB was saying. Would you like to comment on that quickly, Papa Diouf, on the new normalcy of how NGOs, specifically international NGOs, will work, not only globally, but here in Rwanda as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I agree with all the tweets that have been shared by our followers. I mean, COVID-19 is clear. Things will no longer be the same. So that one is clear. As you say, it's a new normalcy. So I mean, some of the things that we had to do was to adapt very quickly. So digitalization is one of the things that we've been doing. So we've been using increasingly the radio. We've been using increasingly the TV. the SMS messaging, etc., to be able to reach out the communities. So, I mean, in response to your earlier question, it's not that we will not reach the communities. I mean, the face-to-face will be still there, but as you know, like now, we have some health requirements we need to use. But we have seen that using the digital has really been able to fill in that gaps and to be able to reach the people.
Brian, is there something you'd like to add?
I just wanted to raise the issue of duplication, because like he rightly pointed out, you have many NGOs. It would be good to shed more light on whether that's a discussion they have had internally. How do you minimize duplication of effort, especially with the financial constraints that are increasingly becoming a problem? Because if you look at the pressure on government, from all angles, whether it's the development partners, there's a lot of pressure. So internally, it would be good to understand the kind of discussion happening to avoid duplication, because it's not so much about the numbers of NGOs, but the impact the NGOs are creating on the ground.
Absolutely. We're coming towards the end of the show. Do you want to quickly answer the question, both of you? What are you doing to avoid duplication, especially with the funds that we've been talking about, the 9.2 million that has been realized to fight this pandemic in Rwanda?
I think what I would say on duplication of efforts, this goes with the recent new concept of localization. And localization around, there are grand bargain commitments that have been signed by most of countries, whereby now the focus should be on local NGOs. Actually, international NGOs providing capacity building, but interventions are implemented by local civil society. But when you look at the current status quo, is more of the partnership that is between the local civil society and INGOs is more of transactional partnership model. So we need a more genuine, complementary and transformational partnership approach that is locally led responses for sustainable development. And our partnership has been more of operational partnership, but we need to be having strategic partnership. So I think it is very important for us to go back and reflect what we need to change to avoid this duplication of efforts and ensure that, because for instance during the pandemic, maybe the headquarters of one of the international NGOs is in Washington, D.C., communicates to their subsidiary branch that is in Rwanda. You see, this is the pandemic. Please do not go out. But for us as Rwandans, we've got to face the realities on the ground and address those challenges. So I think it is very important as we discuss to see how this localization and the grand bargain commitments are going to be implemented to avoid duplication.
Thank you very much. Would you like to add on that before we close, Papa Diouf?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, COVID-19 is a challenge, but we're using it as an opportunity really to be able to make a greater impact. I think that was the right word. I mean, how can we make an impact at scale with less funding? So that means that we need to be complementary, and that's what it is about. So we are not here just to implement, to have our banner again. It's really to help the people on the ground. It's to help the Rwandans. To help Blessing again, who's blind and who's in Nyamasheke. That's what we are here about. So I think complementarity is quite important, and of course, we need to work much closely with the Rwanda Civil Society Platform and NGO to make sure that we kind of cross-fertilize and complement each other in order to make a greater impact at scale.
Absolutely, impact at scale, and I like your use of the word cross-fertilize. So to our guests, I'd like to thank you very much. First of all, thank you for coming to the square and wearing Made in Rwanda. We keep it Made in Rwanda on the square. So thank you for that. You look very good tonight, both to you, Papa Diouf, and John Bosco. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Great. I'd also like to thank the rest of panelists. Charles Bonner, last sentence on our guest on the topic tonight. Just one sentence.
Yeah, I think mine is really about doing things very differently and more impactful. Let them make sure, COVID-19 should be a learning period. Let them make sure, for example, if you're in education, leave no one behind. If you're dealing with the deaf and the dumb and the Ministry of Education is teaching through radio and TV, how do you ensure that this person is not left behind? If people are complaining that you're international NGO, and if we had more time, I'm sure this might happen after the show. These two guys are going to fight. Bosco doesn't like that Papa Diouf is doing all the jobs that he can do, but I'm sure it's going to be an interesting one. Yes.
Brenda, closing remarks very briefly.
I think there's room for support, and the NGOs are much needed right now because the government has a lot of pressure in terms of interventions. So you would expect the NGO world to complement the ongoing efforts. But they can't do that without, again, mobilizing and getting the help that they need. So it would be interesting to see how they pivot, like we've been saying, paying attention to their expenditure, of course, because when you look at civil society expenditure, sometimes the graph on program support, recurrent expenses, there are a bit of questions there. But I think with the pandemic, of course, people will be watching the budget quite closely, so it will be difficult. Yeah.
But I think also moving forward, these are practices and methods that should stick, you know. This scrutiny, this quick turnaround in terms of, you know, addressing very dire issues and people in communities. I'm hoping this can be, you know, the way, the work ethic that is there to stick across the board for civil society organizations. But thank you once again to our guests. Thank you for informing us on the very commendable work that the NGO world and CSO world is doing in Rwanda. That's a significant sum, $9.2 million being raised in less than half a year. Very, very commendable. And we're really looking forward to seeing how it's going to change the lives and at least help communities that are really affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you once again to our guests. Charles Benner, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much. To our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you very much for sticking and supporting The Square. Keep the conversation going. We don't have time to read all the tweets and our Facebook, our social media platforms, but keep the conversation going. Thank you to our viewers for watching. Have a good night and see you again next week. Thank you.